love Jesus,
Apostolic Sunday School.
If you love Jesus,
Apostolic Sunday School.
Hello and welcome to ApostolicSundaySchool.com. We're always looking for great object lessons, and I just saw a really neat one that is very easy to do with resources that are readily available from your local stores, and I wanted to share that with you. First time I saw it was from Brother Tyler Hodge from the Bakersfield, Oildale area. And he did this at a junior camp, and it was really top-notch quality. So I'll give you the point of view from the audience, and then I'll tell you what's happening. First of all, you have a styrofoam head, like a mannequin head that you can get at like a beauty salon. They use them to drape wigs on or whatever, the little styrofoam. I think you can buy them for $5-10. And in that, he started putting long strips of styrofoam into the head. These strips were considerably bigger than the head were, at least longer, and there was no way these things could fit. And you can teach a lot of lessons with this, but the one he was talking about was all the distractions, all the things that come into your mind during your life. Talking about distractions, both good and bad. We've also used it for one God, where you have teaching of that there's no God, that there is three gods. And with each of these, you have a long strip, and on the side of it is written whatever you're trying to teach. So like I use it for the one God. So we had one that had three gods on it. And these strips are 3 or 4 feet long. No way they could fit into this tiny little styrofoam head. And you start feeding it into the styrofoam, and it just disappears into the head. It's unbelievable. Then we had no God, the atheists, and then we had a million gods, the Hindus, and then we had all of these goofy variations. And we started talking about what you should be feeding yourself, which is one God, and his name is Jesus. And this one was the longest one I could find. I think this one was a good 5 feet long-ish. And that feeds into this head. And the styrofoam head is your typical styrofoam head, maybe a foot tall, and you're feeding in a 5 foot long piece of styrofoam. There's no breaking, there's no cracking, nothing. And it just feeds into this head and disappears. It's unbelievable. So total, you can feed in 40, 50 feet of styrofoam, and it just vanishes into this head. It's just unbelievable. And of course, I think it's going through the head and into the table maybe. So you pick the head up while you're doing it, and it still disappears. It's unbelievable, and you can use this to teach a lot of things. The science behind it is pretty simple. It's actually the styrofoam is melting because in the head is a jar. You cut out a hole in the styrofoam head, you put this jar down into it, and you fill it about halfway with acetone. Acetone is like a paint thinner, a cleaner, and you can get it at Walmart in the paint section. And when styrofoam hits acetone, it instantly starts to dissolve. Not dissolve, but it just loses all of its air, and styrofoam is incredibly expanded, so you can feed just an enormous amount into this acetone, and it just seems to have no end. So it's pretty incredible. I have, following this, there's going to be a video clip of Brother Tyler when he was actually doing it at junior camp. I think I may have another clip in there of when we did it later. But you got to try this one. It's a great object lesson. Super easy to use.
In our lives. So this is going to represent you and me, okay? And a lot of us have a lot of different influences. Anybody know what this is? Church. This is going to represent church. Is that a good or a bad influence? Good. It's a good influence, right? So we receive this good influence into our life. We receive that good influence into our life, and it becomes a part of who we are. It influences us in a good way. And we receive what we learn at church. We receive the Holy Ghost. We receive knowledge about Jesus, knowledge about having a relationship with God. That's a good influence. And then we might go over grandma's house who's not in church, or maybe we go home and there's a television there. Do you think TV shows are going to be a good or a bad influence on us? Bad influence on us. They're going to distract you from the more important things. They're going to be promoting worldliness and sin and all this stuff, violence and cursing and all these bad things that might influence our minds. And we let those come into our minds, and guess what? Now, all of a sudden, come on, get down in there. Oh, I said get down in there. This one's a little thick.
You have to throw that in that one head.
That's right. And we receive this information, we receive these influences. Now, all of a sudden, we have God, and we have the world mixed into our body. Is that a good or a bad thing? God doesn't mix with bad. God doesn't mix with evil. God is holy. God is just. God is pure. God is clean. And yet we allow these bad influences. We allow these bad things into our heart. That's not good. What about family and friends? A good or a bad influence?
Can be
It
both.
would be a good influence. I hope that it's a good influence. But who here has ever had a friend that every time you got around them, you got in trouble? Every time you hung around with certain people, you just happened to get in trouble. Maybe some of you have family that's not a really good influence on your life, and you can't escape that. That's not your choice, but they still come into your life. Now, you have a choice over your friends. You need friends that are going to be good influences over you. But sometimes you have family that's a bad influence on you, and you don't have a choice on how to get that out of your life, so you receive that into your mind. It's pretty cool, huh? What about music? Good or bad influence?
Can be both.
It could be both, Brother Booker. Give me an example of why music would be a bad influence. Say. They could have cuss words in them.
Some could be church music.
That's right. It could be good because it's church music, it's gospel music. It could be rap or hip hop.
Some could have, I know the word.
Nasty lyrics.
Yeah.
What about rock and roll?
Witchcraft.
We could be talking about witchcraft. Man, that's some serious stuff. What about music being a good influence? Lexi already said it. We could have church music. We could have gospel music. We could listen to Christian music. And we let that come into our life, and it influences us. Receiving all of this information, receiving all these influences. Isn't that super cool?
How do you put it in there?
That's super cool, huh? Listen. Listen. Now all of a sudden we have all of these different influences in our life. And we're supposed to be the house where God lives. Well, I already mentioned it before. God doesn't mix well with evil. It's not very pretty. But what we have to decide to do is things might try to influence us, but we have to make up in our mind. We might receive the information, but we have to make up in our mind that this house isn't going to be dirty by the world. This is God's house. Point at your heart and say, this is God's house.
This is God's
I want you to act like you're talking trash on the basketball court and say, not in God's house.
Not in God's house.
Not in my house.
Mm-hmm.
This ain't happening in my body. I'm not going to let those things influence me to be bad. Why? Because I'm the church. What people see me do, guess what? If I had your name written on one of these styrofoam pieces, say if your name was written on here, and guess what? You influence others. Who here has a little brother or a little sister? Who here has friends at school or maybe even at church?